Welcome. My name is Olivia Mattis. I'm president of the Sousa Mendes Foundation. Our foundation is devoted to a hero of the Holocaust, Aristides de Sousa Mendes, who saved thousands of lives and paid a very heavy price for his action. Today, we are incredibly privileged to have another hero who paid a very heavy price for his action, and that is, of course, Mr. Natan Sharansky. Mr. Sharansky will be in dialogue with Professor Gil Troy. Now, I've known Dr. Troy for many years. It happens that he was my brother's college roommate. So it is truly a small world. Gil is a professor at McGill University and an expert on Zionism and also presidential history, US presidential history. And he will be guiding today's conversation with Mr. Natan Sharansky. So Gil, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. Erev Tov from Jerusalem. Good evening from Jerusalem. And indeed, you know, this is really a story of two very, very different people. I was born in the vast shopping center called North America, as you can hear in my New York accent. And I spent the 1980s studying history at Harvard with Michael Mattis and others. And Natan Sharansky was born into the vast prison camp called the Soviet Union and spent much of the 1980s in the Gulag. But what's extraordinary about the book we wrote together, Never Alone, was that while we argued about style and logic, he's a mathematician, I'm a historian, about the wording here and there, at no point in all our years of collaboration have we had an ideological disagreement. And we come from these two very different worlds, but we come, first of all, with a shared love of the Jewish people, a shared love of humanity, and a deep understanding that human beings need a sense of identity, need a sense of nationalism, need a sense of community, but also need a sense of democracy and freedom. And we also temperamentally, as second children, come from a place where we say there's too much extremism in the world today. Too many people going to one extreme or the other. And I think you'll hear some of these themes in the conversation today. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce my friend and my co-author in the book Never Alone, Natan Sharansky. Natan, welcome.
Shalom, hello, Gil and all the friends. I'm very glad for this opportunity.
So you're born in the very powerful year of 1948 in the Ukraine, in a town at the time was called Stalino. And one of the things that's quite striking is that you grow up in, and here we see a picture of your family. You're the second child, as mentioned. Leonid is your older brother. And you grow up around a Holocaust. There are signs of a Holocaust that never happened. Tell us a little bit about that. What did you know? What did you not know about the events that had just finished just a few years before?
So it's really interesting. I was born in 1948 in the place which was a very Jewish one, the city of today of Donetsk, then was with a lot of Jews. And there was nothing Jewish in our life. No bar mitzvah, no brit milah, no holidays, no tradition, no religion, no language, no place where you can learn all these things. The only Jewish thing was antisemitism, a lot of antisemitism. And both in the streets and discrimination. And because that was the policy of the Soviet leaders to erase our identity. And one of the most amazing things that growing just among the killing fields of Holocaust, Donetsk, Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov, Kiev, in all these places, many of Jews and many of my family were killed only a few years ago, and we grew knowing nothing about the Holocaust. Of course, we were all celebrating the great victory of the Soviet Union over Nazism. We were celebrating the courageous soldiers and parties and so on. And nothing was said about systematic elimination of Jewish people. Only many years after I discovered that my playground, that I was playing these games as a child, only 3 miles near the biggest grave, after the biggest after Babi Yar grave, was 75,000 Jews were thrown into the mine, in the deep shaft of the mine, 450 meters deep. 75,000 people were killed in this killing field of Holocaust, only a few miles from my home, and we knew nothing about it. We only, the only thing that we knew, that because we are Jews, that it means that it is written in the idea of your parents, Jew, and that's like you are born like it was kind of disease, and you have to work very hard to be the best in your profession, the best in school, the best in the institute, in order to overcome this disease. That's all. That's how much I knew in my childhood.
So you knew nothing about Jewish history, Jewish identity. All you knew was about anti-Semitism. But one of the other things I think you did learn was the skill called doublethink. Tell people what doublethink is. And how you learned what doublethink works.
Yeah, I was 5 years old, a little bit older than that picture. And by the way, we had a very loving family. For almost 20 years, our parents didn't have children. And then when father came back after the Second World War, where for 4 years he was fighting, then my parents finally had 2 children. And there was a very loving and open atmosphere inside the family. But when I was 5 years old, my father told me and to my elder brother, who was 7 years old, that today Stalin died. And that's very important. It was very good for us, for Jews, that Stalin died. Because we were in big danger, but now danger probably disappeared. And he tried to explain me in the tone that I can understand. And he said, but don't tell to anybody. Remember all your life that miracle happened. Stalin died just in time of danger for Jews, but do what everybody does. Don't say to anybody. And I go back next day to the kindergarten, and I cry together with all the children about the death of Stalin, and I sing together with all the children about the great son of all the people, Stalin, who gave us such a happy childhood. And I have no idea how many children are really crying, or how many of them are crying exactly as me, because my father told me. That's how I started this life of Soviet double thinker, that you go through your life, you say things which everybody says, you vote as everybody votes, you read only books which are permitted to read, and you know that all this is lie. But the truth exists only for your family, for your close friends.
But in truth, you were a champion double thinker. You learned how to live that outside life and that internal life. You became a chess champion. You worked your way up. You were accepted to the Soviet equivalent of MIT. And then at a certain point, you decide to essentially commit career suicide in the Soviet system. Why would you do such a crazy thing? Why would you give up the goodies that you had earned with such hard work to just fight for the Jewish people? What was going on in your head? What motivated you?
Well, so I grew, as I said, without identity and without freedom. And I could not, that's why I couldn't appreciate how important these things are. And then in 1967, I'm 19 years old, I just entered this very prestigious Soviet Institute, and I hope that now the worst is behind me, because here I can hide like in this castle of science. And then happens 6-day war. And suddenly people around you, those who like you and those who don't like you, practically everybody looks at you in surprise, because it was a huge humiliation for the Soviet Union, this failure with Arab allies. Soviet Union spent so much money and weapons and encouraged these Arab countries, started celebrating the victory of the progressive Arab regimes over imperialist Zionist agent Israel. That's official language, of course. And then suddenly this failure in a few days, then these people look at me and say, how you guys did it? And everybody says to me, how you did it? Why they think that, do they think I'm not loyal citizen? In the beginning, you're even almost frightened. Why they all say how you did it? But then you decide to understand. You start reading in the underground the books brought by Jewish tourists about Israel and then about ourselves. So suddenly you realize that if you decide, if you want, your history will not start from Bolshevik revolution, from communism, with all these awful things which are happening, but it can start from exodus from Egypt. It's so easy to read this history and to feel that you continue this march for freedom, which started from leaving Egypt. And more than this, you discover that there are people, Jewish people, all these Jews who are coming from New York and Miami and London and Sydney and Paris. They say, oh, your father is from Odessa and my father is from Odessa, or my grandfather is from Odessa. Your whole family, you want to help you. So I suddenly discovered that if only you will decide, these people will be all your family. And maybe the most important thing, of course, you discover that there is the state of Israel, which is ready to send airplanes to the end of the world, but to help you. And that's what is identity. You discover that there is history, that there are people, there are countries that you want to be part of it. And then when you discover that there are things which are even more important than your physical career, you look at these soldiers near the wall from the famous picture of 1967, you think, my God, they are 19 years old, 20 years old. That's exactly your age. And they're doing the history. And what you're doing your career. And that's when that's what gives you real strength to finish this life of doublethink and to say publicly the first time phrase, which authorities didn't want to hear, that I really don't want to live here. I want to live for Israel. And the moment you say it, your life has changed. At the end of your career, there will be searches, there will be interrogations, there will be arrests, but you suddenly start speaking, saying things that you really think, you really believe in. And then you enjoy this newly discovered freedom. And that is your identity, which gives you strength to speak your mind freely and to become a free person. And that's how I became, a few years, of course, how I became activist and then spokesman of two movements, Soviet Jewry Zionist movement and human rights movement in the Soviet Union.
So in discovering your identity and discovering your roots, you also discover a broader vision of freedom. And some people went one direction and only focused on the refusement movement, on the Zionist movement, on the movement to free Soviet Jews. Others went another direction and were dissidents fighting for human rights. But here, as we see a picture of you with Andrei Sakharov and Yelena Bonner, you decided, no, that you were going to be part of two movements. What was that like? And how did you manage and balance the two?
Yeah, well, that's very dear. People in my life, Andrei Sakharov, the #1 physicist in the Soviet Union, who in one day turned from #1 scientist to #1 dissident, when he declared and publicly declared that without freedom of thought, there will be no real science and there will be no real full life in the Soviet Union, and started fighting for human rights. And at that time, I started fighting for the rights of my and then the other Jews to go to Israel. And I felt deep sympathy and solidarity with those people who were supporting my struggle, but also struggle for freedom. So that's how I became involved and I became spokesman, as I said, of these two movements. And it's true that from both sides, there was some pressure. From Israel, there was pressure that you have to choose. You cannot be both. You're a Zionist. Why should be involved in the bigger causes or broader causes, which can only irritate KGB and make our struggle even more difficult? And on the other hand, there were some dissidents, not Andrei Sakharov, who fully supported our struggle, but there were some others who were saying, you have to decide, are you nationalist or are you universalist? Are you for the rights of only Jews, of your tribe, or you think about the freedom of all the world? And sometimes pressure was very strong, but I felt it's a mistake. You don't have to choose, because if it is such a natural connection between your identity and your freedom, your desire to belong to something bigger than your life, and at the same time, your desire that nobody will dictate you what to think and what to say. And I would say that if you want to be strong enough to change the world for the better, from where you can take the strength, from your identity. That's what I discovered. On the other hand, if you want that our struggle for our rights as Jews will be welcomed and supported by all those people in the world, it is so natural to connect it with the greater struggle for this freedom of speech, freedom of movement, and for the freedom in the world. So I discovered identity and freedom simultaneously. I discovered them as things which are connected with one another. And until this day, I'm insisting, and that's in fact the message of our book and of practically my struggle for many years, that we should not permit to separate these two deep desires, our desire to strengthen our identity, our Jewishness, our connection with our history, people, and our belief in human rights and democracy.
But dancing at those settings, being the spokesperson both for the Refusnik movement, which I discovered in writing the book at its peak, only had 150 real activists who were willing to sign a petition, and the broader dissident movement of Andrei Sakharov and Yelena Bonner made you a target. And at a certain point, the KGB stops just following you, but throws you in prison. And you end up in the Gulag, and for 9 years, you're cut off from contact with both movements. You're cut off from contact really with your family for most of the time. How do you survive 9 years in prison? And how do you prove to the KGB, despite the fact that they control your body, that they don't control your soul, that you're still a free person in this vast prison camp of the Gulag?
Well, first of all, you have to remember always that you are in the middle of the great struggle not only for your survival or to get out of the prison. If your aim is your physical survival, you can make a deal with KGB. But it is historical struggle of our people to be free, to break down the Iron Curtain of the Soviet Union, for millions of the people to be able to join their people. And you feel a great responsibility that, in fact, every word of you, which was so important when you were in the middle of this struggle before you were arrested, today may be even more important. You really have to feel the connection with your people and unity in this struggle. And here was an important point that KGB tried to convince me from the moment they arrested and accused me in high treason. So tried to explain me that I'll be sentenced to death if I will not cooperate with them. They tried to convince me that I'm alone, that the Jewish leaders of Jewish organizations are afraid to mention my name because who knows, maybe they think I'm a spy. That the world has so many different agendas. The world is now dealing with other things. It's already months and 2 months of interrogation. Year and a half was from arrest to the court. And I know that it's all lies. I try to imagine, to see in my mind, to remember every Jewish activist whom I met who came sent by their organization. There were 170 whatever Jewish activists who were on the list of my accomplices because KGB knew about every meeting, of course. And there were Jewish leaders with whom I talked, or simply Jewish students and housewives, as KGB called them, with whom I talked on telephone thousands of times. I could imagine. I convinced myself they couldn't stop. Of course, they continue the struggle. And I imagine how my wife is going from one Jewish community to another, and the state of Israel is behind them. And that was a picture in my mind, how all the Jewish people are fighting, and I should never lose this feeling of connection and feeling that I am only a soldier in this big struggle, and I have a very important role. And of course, it was very important also not only to think seriously about it, but in every possible way to remind my prison guards that I'm a free person. For example, I loved to tell to my interrogators, there were 17 interrogators because it was like interrogation of hundreds of Jewish activists all over Soviet Union. So when 2 or 3 of them are sitting in front of me and trying to interrogate, and I'm telling them, well, by the way, I just remembered a great joke about Brezhnev, Soviet leader. And I'm telling them another anti-Soviet joke about Soviet leader. And there was, of course, a lot of them, and they were very funny, but they were underground jokes. But I'm speaking my mind. I'm telling them and laughing, and they wanted to laugh, but they cannot. It will be the end of their career. So they have to express their anger. They have to shout at me. And then I tell them, you see, you cannot even laugh when you want to laugh. And you want to tell me that I'm in prison and you're free. You are in prison. And I was telling myself again and again the rule which I took from the very first day. They cannot humiliate me. Only I myself can humiliate myself. If I'll do something unworthy of this great historic struggle that we Jewish people have. And that all helped, this feeling of connection, this feeling of responsibility, this feeling of unique historic movement that you're part of it. That was giving me strength through all these 9 years.
So your ability to laugh and their inability to laugh shows that despite the fact that you might have bars on your window, you're free inside and they're really imprisoned. Quite remarkable. Now, you mentioned 2 secret weapons here. One is the united Jewish people, even though, of course, they continue to have fights between left and right, religious and non-religious. And you also mentioned Avital. When we look at the picture, the 2 pictures from your Liberation Day, tell us a little bit about that crazy day, that day you went from slavery to freedom, where you actually relived the Exodus in 24 hours.
Well, yes, really, it was a very dramatic day in my life. In fact, what was before the day, and I didn't know it, but at this summit in Geneva between President Reagan and then the leader of Soviet Union, young leader, Gorbachev, my wife, as always in those years, was demonstrating in front of this Palace of Nations. And Reagan started his meeting, as he later told me, with Gorbachev saying, you can keep saying that Sharansky is an American spy. But not only I know that it's a lie and you know that it's not true, but my people believe to that lady, and he showed on Avital demonstrating. So as long you will keep him in prison, nobody will believe you. I didn't know anything about it, of course. I was in the punishing cell in Siberia. But a few days after this, I was moved from punishing cell to the hospital. They started feeding me for a month. They were feeding me, and I added like 15 kilos that month. Since then, I added another 30 kilos. Now it's a big problem. But then from a very weak person, I suddenly became strong enough. And then they gave me a lot of medicine, a lot of injections in order to strengthen me. And then they put one day, 40 days after they took me from punishing cell, they put me, bring me to the airport, put me in the airplane, huge airplane, only me and 4 KGB men, and we fly. And I demand, I say, what is, by sun, I see that we go to the west, 1 hour, 2 hours, and 3 hours. Soviet Union also has its borders. And so then I say, what is it? Is it hijacking? You kidnapped me? What it is? And then they declare me with a solemn voice that in accordance with the decision of Soviet government for the behavior unworthy of Soviet citizen, I'm deprived of Soviet citizenship and exiled from Soviet Union. So, okay, then I make my speech and I say that I hope the day will come that all the Jews and all the Soviet people will become free. And then I'm still afraid it's all like in the dream. And we are landing in the airport in Eastern Germany. There, and they say, they see that there are a lot of people in the airfield, KGB, police, and a lot of journalists. They don't want to go out. So they say to me, you see that car, you go out and you go straight. Agreed? And the moment he said agreed, I said, my God, I said, for 9 years, I never agreed with you. Vote me to go straight, I'll go zigzag. Then they go out, four of them to stay on two sides of this tarmac, and I go zigzag as I promised them to that car where the KGB takes me to the Glinicky Bridge, and there American ambassador of the Western Germany comes to Eastern Germany. That was the bridge which was between Eastern Germany and Western Germany, Eastern Berlin and Western Berlin, and takes me through that bridge. And they say, is Vitaly there? They say, no, there is a lot of journalists, but she's waiting in Frankfurt. There on the bridge, I say, so where is the border? And he said, this line, that is the border. And they said, oh, the freedom, and I jump. And while I jump there, another thing is happening. They gave me all the new clothes in prison, and it was all very big for me. But they didn't give me a belt because there are no belts permitted in the prison. So I said, what I'll do with my trousers? They said, okay, they gave some wire, whatever. So now that I jump, it's broken. And I have to catch my trousers. That's how I entered the free world. Everybody who asked me, what was your first thought about when you entered the free world? That was my first thought, how not to lose my pants. And then they take me to Frankfurt. They meet for the first time after 12 years my wife and say, sorry, I'm late. Small Israeli airplane takes us straight to Israel. The door opens. Avital tells me, that is our Prime Minister, Shimon Peres. That's our Foreign Minister, Yitzhak Shamir. And so on and so on. And then we go straight to the Kotel. So the day which started from in Soviet prison finished near the Kotel, dancing and singing with all our people. And so it's really like if somebody has the experience how to go straight from hell to paradise, that's my feeling. That's how I felt. And I can tell that for a few days, I couldn't sleep because I think instinctively I was afraid that if I go to sleep, I'll wake up again and punish itself because hundreds and hundreds of times I saw this dream of coming to Israel. No doubt that the real picture of coming was even more exciting and more colorful than all my dreams.
So we should emphasize that you zigzagged across the tarmac, but most people remember you zigzagging across the bridge. But by the time you were being escorted by the American ambassador on Glinicky Bridge, you were already free, and you were worried, as you said, about your pants falling down. Now, shortly thereafter, you meet another extremely famous political prisoner who also in his autobiography explains that he discovered his identity, his tribal identity as a South African, and from there became a freedom fighter, Nelson Mandela. And I know that the people on this call next week are going to be learning more about the South African struggle. What was your meeting with Nelson Mandela like, and what was the competition that emerged between the two of you?
Yeah, well, Nelson Mandela was released exactly 3 years after my release. I was released on the 11th of February, 96, and he, 86, and he 89. And during those 3 years, because I wrote, not only continued our struggle to open the gates and Iron Curtain fell, and I wrote my memoirs, Fear No Evil, and it was published, and Nelson Mandela already had an opportunity to read it. So when, during his first meeting when he was released with the Jewish community, with the local Jewish community and Jewish leaders, I remember I received a call from the head of ADL, Abe Foxman. He, with excitement, was saying, you know, Nelson Mandela read your book. He just now asked about you, and he wants to meet you. So I also was very surprised. Then just during the first meeting of Nelson Mandela to America, and I was also at that time in the United States, we met in Los Angeles. And that was a very interesting meeting because, well, first of all, he explained to me how Helen Sussman, the only member of parliament, of course Jewish. She was the only member of parliament in the apartheid South Africa who was insisting to have regular meetings with Nelson Mandela. How she brought him this book, and he thought, oh, such a thick, heavy book. I don't think I'll have an opportunity to read it. But he said, when she came next time, I already read it all, because it was all about interrogations, and there were so many things that reminded me my prison experience, and this desire to not only to make people free, but to have to see all the world free. And he said, but you know, of course, your prison was much more difficult. He said, what do you mean much more difficult? You were 27 years in prison. I was only 9 years in prison. I'm Tzutzek, what it is, 27. He said, yeah, but you were alone. And I was with my people. He started explaining me, and especially when he was put on this island, I have to say that after some time that being lonely, then there he could meet with all his friends of his party, also your leaders, and they had meetings, and they were discussing the strategy of the party, and they were sending to their comrades who were not arrested what they believe should be strategy. So it was a very different life from my 400 days in the punishing cell, many years of solitary confinement, and so on. And but when he said, but you know, you were alone and my people were with me. I said, what are you talking about? My people were always with me, every minute. He said, yes, yeah, I read your book, I understand, but it was all in your head. And so it took me time to convince him that what was in my head, that was real, because really what to do? Our situation of Soviet prisoners in Zion was very different than political prisoners in the West. We were absolutely isolated. In 9 years, I had 2 meetings with my family. Of course, we didn't know almost anything about the big campaign which is taking place in the world, but this conviction that you're absolutely sure that all your people never stop fighting, that was very important. And no doubt that Nelson Mandela, who didn't have, in order to learn this, to work with his imagination, and Helen Sussman was only one of many his direct channels to the free world. But for him also this feeling that this struggle is not only about him and about his party friends, that's the historical struggle of his people, and that's in fact historical struggle of all the world, how to become free and better place for everyone.
And in fact, the people who survived the prison were the ones who weren't just focused on themselves, but were focused on a broader community, on answering to a broader audience and understanding that they were part of a broader narrative. I think that's one of the messages that we try to convey in the book. Now, you get out after 9 years in prison. You spend 9 years in politics, which you often joke is another form of prison. And then you spend another 9 years in the Jewish Agency. And throughout, your vision is passing on the torch. And we're speaking now to a network of people, many of whom work in Holocaust education, many of whom work with the next generation. How do you pass on the message, the key learnings, the key insights that you learned in prison and in freedom to the next generation, both to your children and to here we see you with a group of shlichim, of emissaries, young Israelis who spend a year, 2 or 3 abroad in the United States, in the United Kingdom, all over the world, passing on the message. What's the essential message you feel we need to pass on to the next generation?
You see, on this picture that you just now saw, this is my picture with our shlichim, with our younger shlichim, shinshinim, those who after the school before the army take a year of volunteer work in Jewish communities. In fact, I am very proud of this. I was involved in many projects in Jewish Agency, and I really enjoyed it. Every day working in Jewish Agency, I'm especially proud of our work with shlichim. In the time that shlichim, Israeli messengers to Jewish communities, I almost doubled the number of shlichim of Jewish Agency. It moved to more than 2,000. The average age went down from 36 to 20, so 38 to 26. And there were all types of new shlichim. Shlichim to synagogues, shlichim to youth movements, shlichim to schools, shlichim, one of the most challenging to the universities. Until this day, it becomes one of the most difficult battlefields. And the message was these young Jews in the world always want to see Tikkun Olam, to see the world better place, more free will. Always remember, for this you'll need a lot of strength. And the source of the strength is your community, is your identity, is your history, is your country. And that's why I was insisting, being the head of Jewish agency, where traditionally, the aim of Jewish agency traditionally was Aliyah. Of course, I'm fully for Aliyah. I fought for so many years. I believe that the best place in the world is Israel. But strong Jewish communities and strong Israel, there is no contradiction. It is our interest that Jewish communities in the world will be strong. And the more strong their connection to Israel, the stronger their identities, and vice versa. Jewish state must be home for every Jew in the world. It must feel itself connected to every Jewish communities, to different streams, to the Jews with different political agendas. We are all one family, and connection between Jews of the diaspora and Israel, that's what makes our identity strong.
And so that's really been your crusade, your mission, and our mission, to pass on the notion of unity, which unity doesn't mean uniformity. And unity doesn't require everyone to agree about everything, but also to be able to go past some of their differences and see what unites us. And originally, when we started writing this book, we called it 999. We literally signed a contract with the book publisher in New York, Hachette, Public Affairs of Hachette, 999. But I was worried because I felt that 999 sounded very negative for the Germans, 999. It might get our evangelical friends a little upset if they looked upside down, 999, 666, the devil. But I thought it was important to keep that structure of the book, 9 years in prison, 9 years in Israeli politics, 9 years in the Jewish agency. Natan doesn't know where he suffered most. And I'm looking for a title. And I'm in Los Angeles, and I speak to a friend of mine, and he says, well, tell me about the book. And I tell him one of Natan's stories that you heard about how the KGB is telling him he's forgotten, he's abandoned, but he knows he's never alone. And my friend David Suissa goes, that's it. For 75 years, we've been focused on never again. And of course, all of you on this call are so aware of the importance of passing on sensitivity and awareness of our Holocaust martyrs and those friends of ours from outside who helped us. But we also have to pass on a positive message. And what's the positive message to the next generation? That you're never alone. When you're part of this extraordinary network, fighting for freedom, fighting for identity, you're never alone. And with that, we pass on the baton to Olivia, and we thank you for organizing this event today, Olivia, and for all the good work you do with the Susa Mendes Foundation.
Fantastic. So we will get to audience questions in just a moment. I do encourage everyone to continue typing questions. There are just a few questions beginning, so please put your questions in there. We'll have plenty of time. So right now, I want to tell you about our next program, which is actually not next week. It's going to be at the very end of September, after all the Jewish holidays. It's going to be on Sunday, September 26th. And there we will meet in person another hero named Albie Sachs. Albie Sachs is a Jewish hero of South African democracy who struggled alongside Nelson Mandela and others. Albie Sachs was the victim of an assassination attempt by the South African government. Albie Sachs was living in exile in Mozambique, and the South African government put a bomb in his car bombed him, and he was blown up, but he survived. He lost his right arm and he lost vision in one eye. So we're going to see a film about him called Soft Vengeance, and the new democratic South Africa is the soft vengeance that he was looking for what was done to him. And so what happened was, he was a lawyer by training. He was asked by Nelson Mandela when Mandela became the head of the new democratic South Africa, he was asked to author the Constitution and to serve on South Africa's first Supreme Court. So now we will see a little trailer about the film called Soft Vengeance.
The bomb exploded just as Professor Albie Sachs opened his car door.
Albie Sachs.
Doctors gave him little chance of survival.
That moment every freedom fighter waits for. Will they come for me today? And they'd come for me and I'd survived.
It's not as if you wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be brave and I'm going to speak up. It's whatever the consequences, I can't accept this.
When he made the decision that he was going to sit on benches that were segregated and make a statement, for Albie, it was a natural thing to do that.
So this is what it's like. Alone in a concrete cube. The head of the interrogation comes to me. He says, "You sure you don't want to say something?"
Mozambique was a heartbeat for us. It was about creating a different type of society altogether.
But nobody was safe, nobody at all. The very fact that he was such an important opponent of apartheid meant that he was in enormous danger all the time.
Nothing that I did out of my own means. I did because I was a soldier and I got an instruction. I'm just a functionary for the state. That's what I am. There's a threat against my country. I have to take action.
Here, after 24 years in political exile, Albie Sachs being greeted by his mother at Cape Town Airport.
He is the real Mr. Constitution. He is the real Mr. Bill of Rights.
I, Albert Louis Sachs, do hereby swear that in my capacity as Judge of the Constitutional Court of the Republic of South Africa, I will uphold and protect the Constitution of the Republic and the fundamental rights entrenched therein.
Lying in bed recovering, I receive a note. "Don't worry, Comrade Albie, we will avenge you." Avenge me? We're going to chop off the arms? We're going to blind people? Where's that going to get us? But if we get democracy in South Africa and freedom, that will be my soft vengeance.
So I hope you will all join us for our next program, Soft Vengeance, about Albie Sachs. Mr. Sachs will be joining us live from South Africa, and the filmmaker Abby Ginsburg will be with us as well from Los Angeles, and the moderator will be Shulamit Reinhardt from Brandeis University. So we'll have all kinds of time zones, and it should be another fabulous and important program, I hope. So now let's get to your questions. So question number one, Mr. Sharansky, can you please speak more about identity and Jewish identity? Is Nelson Mandela's comment to you that it was all in your head a reflection of identity? Can you speak more about that?
Well, no, I think that Nelson Mandela's comment was from reading my book, and seeing that all these 9 years I was in full isolation and comparing it with his experience, he really felt that maybe it is important that I had in my head, but how much better it was when your people are near you, with you in this struggle. So he didn't have it was not a negative comment. It was not a criticism of Jewish people. It was simply characteristics of station, how it is important that we people of South, that I felt all the time that the people of South Africa are behind me. And I have to say, we Jews have very unique experience of keeping our identity for 2,000 years without the country. We Jews have a very important experience when Bible became, as I think it was Heinrich was calling it, the wandering motherland of Jewish people, that we have book and we have tradition and we are learning. In fact, I would say we were connected through internet for 1,000 years, meaning that Jews all over the world in small places through tradition and through keeping their faith felt themselves as one people. I discovered it much later, but when I discovered it, I thought, oh, we really have unique experience which nobody has, how you can be one people in spite of all the isolations, in spite of all iron curtains. And that's what gives you a lot of strength. And when there are many debates today, divisions, is this type of religion is a real connection with your people or not? If you believe in two-state solution, don't believe, are you a good Jew or a good Zionist? So on. It's all ridiculous. All our political differences, all religious differences, should not undermine the fact that we feel that we are one family going through 1,000 years together and bringing very important message to the world through our own experience. And that's for me is our identity.
So there's a question for both of you, which is, Professor Troy and Mr. Sharansky, you both have such different life experiences and Jewish foundation. How were you able to so clearly articulate the importance of Jewish identity through your book?
Gil.
Yeah. So as I said at the beginning, part of it was, I think, the power of having such different experiences. We could also sift through and see what was the same. What was the same was the peoplehood platform. What was the same was the understanding that Judaism, as I like to say, is an Oreo cookie. Just like an Oreo cookie has a cookie part and the cream part, so too Judaism is this mix of nation and religion. And we both understood that the challenge for the next generation is not just getting the guilt trip, not just being told thou shalt not, but getting an opportunity to launch a Jewish journey and focusing on the thou shalts. And I think one of the profound connections we had was we talked about how we watch so many young people come to Israel on birthright and their eyes light up. They've discovered something. They've discovered their identity. They've discovered their freedom. They've discovered what it is to be a something. And Natan said that that was the same light in the eyes he saw in the Russian Jews who had been stripped of their identity by Stalin, by Khrushchev, by Brezhnev. And they were discovering it after having been deprived. And what a tragedy that so many of our young people, when they come to Israel, haven't been deprived by a totalitarian state, but have been deprived by their own choices and their own parents' choices. So that was one piece of it. And the other piece of it is, as I said, also, we were very much centrists. We're trying to find what we call the muscular moderates path. And we're both extremely distressed by the shift to the far left and the shift to the far right. And you heard again and again the balance, identity and freedom, human rights and Zionism. And that's the golden path that we're trying to hew. And when we hear so much of young people today focusing on canceling one another, not listening to one another, giving all or nothing answers to one another, we're dismayed. And so the passion behind the book was to try to invite people not only to understand that they're never alone, but that things aren't so simplistic. Embrace the complexity, join the juggling act, of Jewish history, of democratic, lowercase d democratic history, and of liberal nationalism.
So another question is, Mr. Sharansky, what can you say about Alexei Navalny? And also, do you think that Russia will ever once again become an actual democracy? Will it ever become a democracy?
Well, I believe that with the time, through history, sometimes through a few years, sometimes through centuries, all the people will come to this society where everybody is free, because that's a natural state of people. That's what they then want. But the path to freedom and democracy and recognition of the power of human rights, as we know, takes time. In Russia, no doubt, it was proved in a very strong way that when given an opportunity to live as free people, majority of people rush to this freedom. But if you don't have civil society institutions, if you don't have developed civil society, you don't have tradition of defending human rights, it's not so simple. It can be easily taken back. In fact, under President Putin, many, not everything, but many parts of a democratic system which were already built were undermined. First of all, independent court became much more dependent, then corruption on political level, and then dealing with political opposition or some dissident journalists. And Navalny, I think, is a real hero, first of all. And in fact, he is acting with the same weapon as Andrei Sakharov and the other democratic dissidents dealt many years ago. What they were doing, in fact, they were saying, in the society which is all kept by fear, and they are, as everybody, double thinkers, they said, we stop being afraid. We want to live as free people under dictatorship. And then they say, we are not afraid. By their own example, they were saying to the others, why are you afraid? In fact, what Navalny did after they tried to poison him, he said, I'm not afraid to speak the truth about them, and I'm not afraid to go back to Russia. Why you should be afraid? And hundreds of thousands of people went on demonstrations welcoming Navalny and protesting his arrest. So, of course, it is a person who is ready to sacrifice his physical freedom in order to encourage many others to enjoy a life of free person as he has. So no doubt, I believe that these people are those who are making real history.
Okay, there's a question about the film that the audience saw, From Slavery to Freedom, and whether you, Mr. Sharansky, were at all afraid going back to Russia to make the film. Was there anything to be afraid of?
No, I wasn't. You have to understand, only during 2 years after my release, I was still considered there a spy, a criminal, or 3 years. And when my friend and my teacher, I would say my rabbi, but he was not Jewish, Andrei Sakharov, passed away, I wanted to come to his funeral. He was with my family in the most difficult days. I wanted to be with their family. And Gorbachev, personally, as I was told, said, no, we are not letting the spies and those who made a treason to come back. That was in '89. But in '91, Soviet Union fell apart. And '92, the prosecutor of the Russian Republic, whatever, decided that I am not a criminal. To the court, it was published that all what I was doing is not considered in any way a crime in Russia anymore. So I could come, but I really didn't want, I didn't have reason to come to Russia until 10 years later, after I was released, I became a minister in Israel government, Minister of Industry Trade, and we had to continue our trade negotiations with Russians. Russians wanted very much, invited me, promised all the good things. I said, one condition. As a minister, I'll come and will visit KGB prison Lefortovo, because that is my real alma mater. And in fact, they agreed. It was the first and the last time that KGB prison was visited there, and I took my wife to punish itself, all other things. When I went out, there was a press conference. Journalists from all over the world came to see this unique event. And I was asked, is it painful to you? Is it self-torturing to go back to this place? I said, to the contrary, I only think it was the most powerful totalitarian regime. It was the most powerful secret police. And 17 leaders of this secret police are telling me that Zionism is finished, Jewish activity is dead, everything is dead. 20 years after, Soviet Union doesn't exist, KGB doesn't exist, 2 million Jews went out, more than 1 million lives in Israel, and all the world is a different place. That is the power of Jewish solidarity. That is the power of when our identity and our desire to be free goes together. And since then, I was many times in Russia, as the head of Jewish agency, we had a huge operation in the former Soviet Union. And I have to say, Avital, my wife, does like to go back to Israel, to Russia. It's like black box for her. But I enjoy coming there because it reminds me every place there where I was arrested, where we had our demonstrations, where we were running away or hiding something from KGB. Every place reminds me what a huge victory we Jewish people had over our enemies in our generation. And it reminds us about our real power.
There are several questions about your wife. And so you and she were separated for 12 years, right? So what did you say to her when you saw her, and how was that like? How did you, what was that reunion like?
I'm still amazed and surprised by my amazing wife. We met near Moscow synagogue, which was the place of the meeting of refuseniks at the times of Yom Kippur War. And we immediately decided that we want to be together, but I was already a refusnik and activist. She didn't yet try. And after some time, we decided, I insisted, that at least she has to try. So we had our chuppah, and she got a visa, and we had our chuppah. And next day after our chuppah, I took her to the airport. I promised her that in 6 months, whatever, I'll be already out. We met 12 years later. I told her, sorry, I'm late. But when I took her to the airport in 1974, she was a very shy girl who spoke few words in Hebrew and no English. When I met her 12 years later, she was the same shy girl speaking a very low voice, but she already led demonstrations of hundreds of thousands of people, and she opened the doors of President Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and François Mitterrand and many other leaders of the world. And no doubt the fact that she has Robert Showbar, that she became a person strongly connected to the tradition, to our history, who felt that she is part of this great battle, gave her a lot of strength in this struggle. At the moment I came back, she said, okay, now I don't have to be in the limelight anymore. Now you are the spokesman. And she was very happy to retreat, to deal with what she really wanted all these years, to have a normal family. And we are now blessed with a good family, yeah.
If I can add, it's one of the great love stories of the 20th century. And she really, from place to place, from capital to capital, from prime minister to presidents to kings, she searched for him. She insisted on fighting for him. And when you meet her and you see what a shy and modest person she is, you really realize that while he, of course, was forced to go out of himself and stretch himself during the 9 years in prison, she also really had to stretch and go out of her comfort zone to be such a public person. And we had the privilege of celebrating July 4th with them 2 years ago, which also happens to be their anniversary. And I raised a glass to their 45th anniversary. And Avital said in the most natural, non-self-pitying, but just this is the reality of our life way, I said 45 years, and she said minus 12, minus 12. And they always live with those 12 years that we're missing. But we start off our book with one of Natan's famous jokes, which is that his great advice to people is get separated first, and then you won't be divorced because you'll love your wife ever more.
So speaking of your book, we have just a few copies left, I think 4 or 5 copies left. So if you want your signed copy, signed by the 2 authors, copy of this incredible book, you can just go back to the Eventbrite page where you got the ticket for today's program and purchase the book there. So be one of the first 4 if you want to get your book. So now let's turn back to our speakers for their final thoughts, perhaps starting with Professor Troy and then finishing with Mr. Sharansky.
Well, as you can imagine, it's really been a great adventure writing the book, talking about the book. I've learned so much. And I think the most important thing really that we want you to take away with is a sense not only of unity, but also of the importance of dialogue. It's a word that comes up again and again in our book, and especially at this moment in time when our skills at speaking to one another and also listening to one another and tolerating differences of opinion have really deteriorated in the United States of America, in the Jewish community. We're really trying to challenge people, and we're not making this false kumbaya call that we all agree, but we are making a challenge that we have to be able to sift between that which is essential, upon which we can agree, and that which is changing and also essential, but in a different way, about which we can disagree. And that's really the message. One of the things that Natan did, his coping mechanisms. You see, he had very much a rich inner life that kept him going. And he talks about playing chess in his head for 9 years. And one of the things he would do is once he won, having been the white or the black, he would flip the chessboard around in his head and then start again. And I think that really is an important metaphor for us today, and especially as we go into the Jewish New Year, for those of us who celebrate the Jewish New Year, that let's learn to flip the chessboard around in our head and to listen to the other side. Maybe we can learn something from those who are foolish enough to disagree with us, and maybe we can find some middle path, because that's really the essence of community. We have clear red lines. We won't go too far. We won't disrespect one another. We know when we've called out those who we call un-Jews, who are really trying to wipe out the state of Israel and buy into a delegitimizing and demonizing agenda. But we also have a big, broad tent like Abraham's, open to the right, open to the left, open to the north, open to the south. We want to bring people into the tent, have a robust conversation, a robust dialogue, and that's part of the message of never being alone. Natan?
Well, continuing this, I have to say that all the idea of this book came when I was finishing Jewish Agency, and there was a lot of discussion, and still is, whether we are departing as Jewish people and the state of Israel or not. And I thought that my experience of seeing this dialogue between Israel and Jewish people from 3 different directions can be very important. You know, in drawing, you know that if you look at the same building, let's say, from 3 different directions, you can really build all the picture together. So if I looked at this dialogue of Jewish people between themselves from prison, when really the dialogue which includes all types of Jews of all the organizations from all over the world. And then I, as a member of the government, was always the government responsible, amongst other things, for the dialogue with Jews of diaspora, where I had to explain the Israeli government to Jews of diaspora. And then in the Jewish Agency, I always tried to explain to our ministers what is important for the Jews of diaspora to Israeli government. And seeing all many debates and disagreements, and we discussed some of them in the book, at the same time, you see that this our desire, deep desire to continue this path together as one family through history is much deeper than all our disagreements. And that's the main message of the book. Let's continue this march. Let's do whatever is needed in order we will continue it as one family.
Well, you have graced our foundation with your presence today, and I couldn't be more grateful. So my profound thanks to both of our illustrious speakers. And thank you to our audience that comes week after week. We will have a few weeks of break So see you at the end of September, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Shana Tova.
Thank you.
Take care.
Shana Tova.
Bye-bye.